Hey Gators, and welcome to Module 9, Terrorist Tactics Part 2. So you've probably already noticed we are studying more tactics, and you might be thinking, really, Jensen? We're doing more bombings and hijackings? We did that all last week. How come we have 2 weeks of tactics? And the reason for that is because we need to focus on two important tactics that terrorists use, namely bioterrorism and cyber terrorism. And there was so much to unpack with these two methods of attack. I really felt like they deserved their own week. So let's get started. So by way of introduction, you may have noticed that I have a picture over here of an attacker. You may recognize that attacker from the film The American Terrorist. He was one of a couple of simultaneous attackers that attacked India in India's 9/11. One of those sites you remember is the Taj Mahal. So I thought you'd want a close-up of this attacker if you wanted to see that person. Okay, so this week we will focus on some of the newest tactics, although the articles we read will suggest they've actually been around for a long time, but they haven't been widely used. Bioterrorism and cyber terrorism. So first, bioterrorism is terrorism involving the intentional release or dissemination of biological agents such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, or toxins in a naturally occurring or a human-modified format in much the same way biological warfare of the past had occurred. This deliberate release of toxins or other harmful agents to cause illness or death in people, animals, or plants could be spread through the air, water, or in food. Terrorists tend to use biological agents because they are extremely difficult to detect and do not cause illness for several hours to several days, so there is a delay. Some bioterrorism agents, like the smallpox virus, can be spread from person to person over time, and some, like anthrax, cannot. Due to the difficulty of handling these agents, such as ricin or anthrax, and the expertise necessary to avoid self-contamination, these attacks can be very logistically challenging to pull off. So that's why we don't see them very often. But we have seen them increasingly used over time. Even though the United States would be better off fending bioterrorist attacks now than they would be a decade ago, especially compared to most countries in the world, the amount of money available to fight bioterrorism over the last few years has begun to decrease. Government agencies which would be called on to respond to a bioterrorism incident would include law enforcement, hazardous materials and decontamination units, and emergency medical units if they exist. So as you can imagine, when you need a stockpile of inoculations or vaccines, what have you, you have to maintain that stockpile, and the potency of that stockpile will diminish over time, if not expire. There is a shelf life to these kinds of chemicals. So it can be a very expensive endeavor to maintain a national stockpile of vaccines, inoculations, or antidotes to biological agents used as weapons. Now, the military has specialized units which can respond to a bioterrorism incident, and among them are the United States Marine Corps Chemical Biological Incident Response Force and the U.S. Army's 20th Support Command. They can detect, identify, and neutralize threats and also decontaminate victims exposed to bioterror agents. The U.S. response would also include the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. So historically, governments and authorities have relied on quarantines to protect their populations once they identify a bioattack has occurred. And international bodies such as the World Health Organization or the WHO already devote some of their resources to monitoring epidemics and have served clearinghouse roles in historical epidemics. So let's get into the business of the week. We're going to talk a little bit more about cyber terrorism in just a minute. But we want you to really evaluate serious threats, determine a timeline for how these tactics has evolved, and analyze and plan how UF would recover. Now that last one I'm making optional. Here's the story behind that. So one of the favorite assignments of this class was basically designing a response plan to a bioterrorism attack on campus. It's a hypothetical kind of war games style assignment that students really enjoyed. They would give me a map of campus, how they would do lockdowns, setting aside space for quarantines, where they would conduct their investigation, what agencies they would use. And it was a pretty big endeavor, but it was very creative and a great way to assess how you think about what's all involved when you're dealing with biological agents. However, given the recent pandemic and events, it became a very fatiguing assignment for students to do, and certainly for me to grade. So it just seemed like maybe one that we needed to postpone or put on the back burner for now. With coronavirus pandemic stuff dealing us blows every day, it just didn't really seem like something we need to be doing right now, because we are in over our heads in planning and strategy and response, and I didn't want to add one more of these things on your plate. The primary difference being this would be an attack, not kind of an incidental outbreak. So you'll notice in the activities, I have the bioterrorism exercise, an attack on campus, as an extra credit assignment. I do have a due date where I need that turned in by, but you have basically a smallpox outbreak scenario that would happen on campus. And I ask you to write a 3 to 4 page summary and an action plan of what you would do. You have different mission objectives to accomplish, and you get all these different agencies at your disposal. So again, I'm not going to require this because we are in COVID-19 fatigue mode with the pandemic. And I wanted to just include it as an extra credit opportunity if you choose to. But again, this is optional, not required. In the Think About It tag, we talk about, should organizations including county and health and state health departments, private hospitals, or the CDC stockpile inoculations and antidotes for terrorism purposes? So that's kind of a question I pose to you as something to consider. And then for your readings, you have The Nightmare of Bioterrorism by Garrett. This might seem like a little bit of an older article, but it's a really classic article when it comes to bioterrorism studies, and it really goes through many, many decades over time and how these agents have developed and what is involved in their use. It's a very easy to read article and very helpful in understanding these attacks. And then secondly, you have the Introduction to Cyber Warfare and Cyber Terrorism by Jens Zuski and Kolarek. Again, a little bit of an older reading given the fact that technology changes every 6 months, right? But this again is a classic, highly cited, highly regarded book when it comes to really providing the groundwork for understanding cyber warfare and cyber terrorism. So you have the introduction that I'm asking you to read, as well as a brief 6-page summary of cyber terrorism attacks by these two authors. And I included a PDF version for you to use. As far as videos, we have more of the 1970s and 1990s terrorism overviews. You will find Bruce Hoffman featured in these videos, as well as some of the response that happened in these decades. So this is kind of a continuation from our Terrorist Tactics 1. And I also do a bioterrorism lecture for you as well. So a little bit lighter on the readings, a little heavier on the videos. I also have 2 optional films that you can watch. Air Force One, which is kind of an oldie but goodie, where Air Force One is hijacked, and it actually features Harrison Ford as the President of the United States in that film. Whenever Harrison Ford is a president, you know it's probably going to be pretty good. So again, optional to watch, but it's very interesting to see that play out in the film. And then another film, Contagion. That's one that you may also want to look at as well. But again, if you're kind of overwhelmed by pandemic type stuff, you might want to skip Contagion. Finally, as far as activities, you'll notice here that we have Terrorism Exam 2, modules 5 through 8. So I have the items that you'll be preparing study on for that exam. And you'll notice that I am only doing modules 5 through 8. We are not including module 9. So this week's materials will be featured on the final exam. So make sure you do take reading notes and write down your ideas so that you have that for the final. But this week's materials will not be featured on the exam. And then below you saw the bioterrorism exercise extra credit piece. So that essentially is module 9 in a nutshell. And I hope you enjoy the materials and the films. They are fantastic. And please reach out if you have questions. Thank you.